In North Africa, where today the wind blows over silent ruins, there existed a city that defied the logic of the ancient world. It wasn't just conquered, it wasn't just defeated, it wasn't just humiliated, it was erased. Rome destroyed cities all the time. That's what Rome did. But Carthage was different. Carthage was an extermination. Because Rome didn't want Carthage's gold. It didn't want Carthage's slaves. It didn't want Carthage's ships. Rome wanted Carthage to cease to exist, not as an enemy, but as an idea. Imagine a city with walls so high they seem to touch the sky, with double ports, one for trade, the other for war, both so advanced that Greek engineers came from afar just to design them. With a fleet that once controlled the Mediterranean as if it were its own backyard. With temples so ancient that even the Carthaginians themselves couldn't say when they were built. This city existed. And in 146 BC, it disappeared. What happened there lasted 17 days. But to understand how 17 days were capable of killing a civilization, we need to understand what Rome felt when it looked at Carthage. And Rome didn't feel anger. Rome felt fear. To understand Rome's fear, you need to forget everything you've learned about the Roman Empire. Because for a long time, Rome wasn't an empire at all. It was an ambitious city-state surrounded by enemies, fighting to survive on the Italian peninsula. Meanwhile, on the other side of the sea, Carthage was already an empire. Before Rome dominated the Mediterranean, Carthage ruled there. They controlled the trade routes, they controlled the ports, they controlled the tin of Britain, the gold of Africa, the purple dye of Phoenicia. And when Rome finally grew enough to cross the sea, when Rome finally dared to contest control of Sicily, the clash was inevitable. There were 3 wars, 3 acts of a tragedy that dragged on for more than a century. In the first war, Rome learned a painful lesson. At sea, no one could defeat Carthage. Rome lost entire fleets, shipwrecks, storms, defeats, and only won because it copied a wrecked Carthaginian ship and invented a last-minute assault bridge. It wasn't genius, it was desperation. In the Second War, Rome learned an even worse lesson. 1 man, 1 general. A name Roman parents used to frighten their children in the dark. Hannibal Barca. He did the impossible. He crossed the Alps with elephants, not 30, not 40, but 37 tons of muscle and tusks, traversing snow and ravines that ordinary soldiers could barely cross. He descended upon Italy like divine punishment, and for 15 years, he transformed Roman territory into a slaughterhouse. Cannae, Trebia, Lake Trasimene, names Rome tried to forget, names where entire legions were decimated, names where the ground was soaked in Roman blood. Hannibal didn't conquer Rome, but almost, very almost. And Rome never forgave, because when a civilization comes close to killing you, it's never just an enemy again. It becomes a ghost. And Rome lived for decades with that ghost hovering over the Senate. And then came the Third War, the last one, the definitive one. But to understand the Third War, you need to understand what happened after the Second. When the Second Punic War ended, Carthage was quartered. Rome tore out its claws. Rome tore out its teeth. Rome tore out its wings. Carthage surrendered its war fleet. It surrendered its war elephants. It surrendered its territories in Spain and the islands. And it accepted a clause that, in practice, was a chokehold. Carthage will not declare war on anyone without the consent of the Roman people. In other words, Carthage was alive, but it was imprisoned. It could negotiate, it could trade, it could get rich, but it could not retaliate. And Rome thought that was enough. But Rome underestimated one thing. Carthage was not just a military city. Carthage was a commercial city. And when you take the sword from a merchant's hand, he's not left defenseless. He picks up a scale. In the following decades, Carthage did what no one expected. It rebuilt itself. The fields around the city, which Hannibal had used to feed armies, now produced wheat on industrial scale. The workshops, which once forged swords, now forged amphoras for wine and olive oil. The ports, silent without warships, began to throb again with hundreds of merchant vessels. Carthage paid the war indemnity to Rome. It paid on time. It paid in full. And there was still money left over. Rome watched this from afar, and Rome didn't like what it saw. Because Carthage didn't need an army to be dangerous. Carthage bought what it needed. It bought mercenaries, it bought alliances, it bought influence. And there was one man in Rome who couldn't sleep while Carthage existed. Marcus Porcius Cato. Cato the Elder. He wasn't a general, he wasn't a legion commander. He was a senator, an orator, an obsessed man. And every time Cato took to the podium in the Roman Senate, no matter the subject, he ended his speech with the same phrase: Caterem censeo Carthaginem este delenctum. As for the rest, I believe Carthage must be destroyed. He repeated this for years, decades, until the phrase ceased to be an opinion and became an order. Cato didn't hate Carthage by chance. He hated Carthage on principle. For him, Rome was rotting. It was indulging in Greek luxury, cheap philosophy, and Oriental laziness. And Carthage was the living symbol of everything Rome should not become. But it wasn't just moralism, it was strategy. Cato saw what other senators chose to ignore. Carthage was recovering. And a rich Carthage, an influential Carthage, a Carthage that once again controlled the Mediterranean routes, was a Carthage that could one day hire another Hannibal. And Rome would not survive another Hannibal. The logic was cold, but it was relentless. As long as Carthage exists, Rome will not be safe. As long as Carthage exists, our children will learn about Hannibal in schools. As long as Carthage exists, the humiliation will live on. Cato didn't want a new war. Cato wanted the end of the war, the definitive one. But to understand the Third War, there was a problem. Rome couldn't simply invade Carthage without reason. The Senate had factions. There were commercial interests with Carthage. There were senators who profited from Carthaginian trade. Rome needed a pretext, a justification, a spark. And that spark came from the most predictable place possible. Next to Carthage, in the territory we now call Algeria, there was a kingdom called Numidia, and the king of Numidia was called Massinissa. Massinissa had a complicated history. He had already fought against Carthage. Then he fought alongside Rome. And in the end, he was rewarded with an entire kingdom right on Carthage's borders. And Massinissa discovered something interesting. He could provoke Carthage at will, invade lands that previously belonged to Carthage, burn border villages, seize pastures and harvests, and Carthage could do nothing. Because by the condition imposed by Rome, Carthage could not declare war, nor even react. Any military movement was a violation of the treaty. So Massinissa advanced. Carthage sent messengers to Rome. Rome listened to the messengers and did nothing. Massinissa advanced a little further. Carthage complained again. Rome listened again. And the cycle repeated. Years, decades, until Carthage couldn't take it anymore. Imagine the scene. You're a Carthaginian farmer. Your family has cultivated the same land for generations. One day, Numidian warriors cross the border, burn your harvest, kill your oxen, and drive out your children. You run to the city, you cry out for justice. And the answer you receive is, "We can do nothing. Rome didn't allow it." Now imagine this happening 1,000 times, in every village, on every border, every year, until patience simply runs out. In 150 BC, Carthage did the unthinkable. It mobilized an army. It crossed the border. It confronted Massinissa and was defeated. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Carthage had violated the treaty. Carthage had waged war without permission. Carthage had given Rome what Cato had been hoping for 30 years. The pretext. Rome declared war. But it wasn't a war like the others. There was no ultimatum to avoid conflict. There were no ambassadors trying to negotiate. There was no room for agreement. The Roman Senate simply decided. Carthage had broken the rules. Carthage had shown that it still had a will of its own. Carthage had proven that it was not a tamed city. And Rome responded with a single dry sentence recorded in the Senate's minutes. Placet, bellum indicitur Carthagini. Approved, war declared on Carthage. But Carthage didn't know this yet. Carthage still believed it could negotiate, that it could explain itself, that it could apologize. And Rome let Carthage believe this, because it was easier that way. When the Roman legions boarded the ships and crossed the Mediterranean, they didn't attack immediately. They landed in Africa. They camped before the walls of Carthage. And they waited. And Carthage, in despair, sent emissaries. "What do you want?" the Carthaginians asked. "We surrender. We accept any condition." Rome replied, "Hand over 300 hostages, sons of the noblest families of Carthage. Now." Carthage surrendered. "Hand over all the weapons, all the armor, all the catapults, all the spears, all the iron that exists in the city." Carthage surrendered. Entire carts passed through the gates of Carthage, loaded with swords, helmets, shields, arrowheads. The arsenals were emptied. The walls were left unguarded. The entire city was disarmed. And when not a single blade remained in the Carthaginian armories, when not a single piece of metal remained that could be forged into a weapon, Rome made its second demand. The final demand. The Carthaginian emissaries were summoned to the tent of the Roman consul, Lucius Marcius Censorinus, the man who would now speak on behalf of Rome. He looked at those men, old senators, respected merchants, priests of ancient temples, and said, "Rome acknowledges your surrender. Rome acknowledges your hostages. Rome acknowledges the surrender of weapons. Now, you will surrender the city." Silence. The Carthaginians did not understand. Surrender the city? Censorinus explained patiently, as one might explain to a child. Carthage will be dismantled. You will abandon this land. You may rebuild your city wherever you wish, as long as it is at least 16 kilometers from the sea. 16 kilometers. far enough to never again have a port, far enough to never again be a naval power, far enough to never again be Carthaginians. The emissaries listened. They did not respond. They simply stood up, left the Roman tent, and walked back to Carthage. And there, before the city council, they reported what Rome demanded. And Carthage did what Rome did not expect. Carthage said no.
Carthage had no army. Carthage had no weapons. Carthage had no allies. Carthage had no warships. Carthage had no elephants. Carthage had no Hannibal. Carthage had only one thing: the refusal to disappear. What happened in the following hours is one of the greatest acts of collective resistance in history. The entire city was transformed. Men ripped metal beams from public buildings to melt them down and forge swords. Women cut their own hair to make bowstrings. Children ran through the streets carrying stones for the walls. The temples were emptied. The bronze from the statues became spearheads. The lead from the pipes became ammunition for slings. And the gold. All the gold of Carthage, from the houses, the banks, the merchants' coffers, was melted down and transformed into very thin sheets, not to sell, to cut. When Rome awoke the next day and looked at Carthage, the walls, once empty, were covered with makeshift soldiers, men without armor but filled with hatred, old men wielding agricultural tools as if they were swords, women on the rooftops ready to pour boiling oil. Rome hadn't expected this. Rome expected to find a city of subjects. It found a city of enemies. And Rome did what it always did when an enemy refused to die. It closed the siege. It cut off supplies. It strangled every entry and exit route. Now there was no more negotiation. There were no more ultimatums. There were no more demands. Now it was only a matter of time. Carthage was surrounded, 3 sides of walls, 1 side of the sea. And at sea, the Roman ships waited. No one would enter, no one would leave. The city had food for a few weeks, water for a few days, and weapons, almost none. But there was something that Rome, with all its military efficiency, never managed to calculate. Because when a people understands that they are going to die, they don't fight to win, they don't fight to survive. They fight to make the enemy pay for every second. And Rome would pay. In the next episode, Rome will discover that besieging Carthage was easy. The difficult part will be entering, because the Carthaginians will not only defend themselves, they will reinvent war. They will transform every alley into a trap, every house into a fortress, every Carthaginian into a soldier. And when Rome finally breaches the walls, when the legions step into the heart of the city, then, and only then, will the 17 days begin.